On a quiet October evening in 2001, a 25-year-old mother named Regina Hicks left her home in Ohio, expecting nothing more than a routine night of picking up her young son. She had plans, responsibilities, and a life she was slowly trying to rebuild. But that night, something went terribly wrong, and Regina would never make it back home. What followed became one of Ohio's most haunting cold cases, a mystery that would remain unsolved for more than 2 decades before the truth finally surfaced. Regina was a young woman trying to move forward with her life. Her relationship with her husband, Paul Hicks, had become strained and toxic over time, and by 2001, the two were living separately. Despite their separation, they remained connected through their 4-year-old son, Montana. On October 18th, Regina had arranged to pick up her child from a property owned by Paul's friend, Steve Gates. It was supposed to be a simple exchange, something she had likely done many times before. But that night would be different. When Regina didn't return home, her family immediately sensed that something was wrong. This wasn't like her. She was a devoted mother, someone who would never disappear without a word, especially not when her child was involved. Concern quickly turned into panic as hours passed with no contact. Soon, a missing person report was filed, and a desperate search began. 4 days later, the case took a dark and tragic turn. Authorities discovered Regina's white Camaro submerged in a pond in Huron County, Ohio. When the car was pulled from the water, the worst fears were confirmed. Regina's lifeless body was found inside. At first glance, it might have appeared to be a tragic accident, a car slipping into the water under unknown circumstances. But investigators quickly realized this was no accident. An autopsy revealed that Regina had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to her head before the car entered the water. This crucial detail changed everything. It meant she had been attacked, possibly rendered unconscious, before the vehicle ended up in the pond. The case was officially ruled a homicide, and a murder investigation began. From the very beginning, suspicion fell on her estranged husband, Paul Hicks. Their troubled relationship, combined with the circumstances surrounding Regina's disappearance, made him a person of interest. In a move that raised even more questions, Paul filed for divorce the very next day after Regina went missing. To investigators, this behavior seemed unusual, even suspicious. However, suspicion alone was not enough to secure an arrest. Despite questioning Paul and examining the available evidence, investigators hit a wall. There were no eyewitnesses, no direct forensic evidence linking him to the crime, and no confession. Without solid proof, the case stalled. Over time, it faded into the background, becoming another unsolved mystery. For Regina's family, however, the pain never faded. They were left with unanswered questions, heartbreak, and a relentless desire for justice. Years turned into decades, but Regina's loved ones refused to give up. They organized awareness campaigns, put up billboards, and even offered rewards for information that could lead to an arrest. Her mother, in particular, dedicated years of her life to seeking justice for her daughter. The emotional toll was immense, and tragically, she passed away before ever seeing the case resolved. Still, the family held on to hope that one day, the truth would come out. For more than 20 years, the case remained cold. Investigators revisited it from time to time, but without new evidence or testimony, there was little they could do. It seemed as though Regina's killer might never be held accountable. But then, more than 2 decades later, everything changed. A renewed investigation by a cold case unit, combined with increased public attention from true crime coverage, brought fresh eyes to the case. Detectives began re-interviewing witnesses, digging deeper into the events of that night. And that's when a key figure finally came forward with information that would break the case wide open. That person was Steve Gates, the same man whose property Regina had gone to the night she disappeared. For years, Gates had remained silent, withholding critical details about what he had seen. But after more than 2 decades, he decided to tell the truth. According to his testimony, the events of that night were far more sinister than anyone had imagined. Gates revealed that Regina and Paul had gotten into an argument when she arrived to pick up her son. The situation escalated, and at some point, Paul struck Regina, knocking her unconscious. Believing or assuming she was dead, Paul then placed her into the passenger seat of her car. What happened next was chilling. According to Gates, Paul drove the car toward a nearby pond and deliberately sent it into the water, with Regina still inside. He then managed to escape the vehicle as it submerged, leaving her behind. Investigators later concluded that Regina ultimately died from drowning, making the act not only violent but calculated. For years, Gates had kept this information to himself. He later explained that he had been living in fear, claiming that Paul had threatened him repeatedly, warning him not to speak out. Those threats, combined with the passage of time, kept him silent for decades. But eventually, the weight of the truth became too much to carry. With Gates' testimony, prosecutors finally had the breakthrough they needed. In 2025, more than 20 years after Regina's death, Paul Hicks was arrested and charged with multiple counts, including murder and kidnapping. The case that had once seemed impossible to solve was suddenly moving forward. During the trial, the defense argued that there was still no physical evidence directly linking Paul to the crime. They claimed the case relied too heavily on the testimony of a single witness whose credibility could be questioned. But prosecutors focused on motive, behavior, and the detailed account provided by Gates. They argued that Paul had a clear motive. He was facing potential financial obligations, including child support, and he wanted control over custody of his son. Regina, on the other hand, was asserting her independence and standing up for herself. According to prosecutors, this conflict ultimately led to a deadly outcome. After hearing all the evidence, the jury reached a verdict. Paul Hicks was found guilty on multiple counts, including 3 counts of murder and 1 count of kidnapping. It was a moment that Regina's family had waited more than 2 decades to see. In January 2026, Paul was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Justice, though delayed, had finally been served. Authorities emphasize that even after decades, accountability matters, and cases like this show that the truth can eventually come to light, no matter how long it takes. For Regina's family, the verdict brought a mix of emotions. There was relief that her killer had been held accountable, but also sadness of the years lost and the pain endured. Her son, who had been just a child at the time of her death, grew up without his mother and now faced the reality of losing his father to prison as well. The case stands as a powerful reminder of how justice can be delayed but not always denied. It also highlights the importance of witnesses coming forward, no matter how much time has passed. One decision, one confession after years of silence, was enough to finally uncover the truth. More than 2 decades after Regina Hicks vanished into the night, her story finally reached its conclusion. A young mother who once disappeared without a trace was no longer just a cold case file. She became a symbol of persistence, of a family's unwavering fight for justice, and of a truth that refused to stay buried forever.